Your foreign policy is flawed, Dave. Your foreign policy is bury your head in the sand, bother no one, and then no one bothers you. And when you're dealing with terrorists, that never works. 9/11 is a great example of that, by the way. We were literally burying our head in the sand, acting like Osama bin Laden was not a threat after he kept saying he wanted to take out America. He wanted to go after America.
Correct.
So
Iran
to the American families,
to the United States of America.
American families who've lost loved ones in a uniform who were killed at the hands of the Iranians and their terrorist proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS and others they gave safe passage to. You're telling me that Iran was not involved in the murder of those American soldiers? They killed more American soldiers than any other regime in the world.
Ben, I'm sorry. I know I'm a fraud and I don't know a lot about foreign policy. Did you just say that ISIS is an Iranian proxy?
I said that they knew that ISIS was given safe passage to cross through at some points in the past. Yes, that's a fact.
They're a proxy of the Iranians.
I said, if you are American and your loved one was killed at the hands of the Iranian regime and their terrorist proxies, you're telling me, and you want to look at those families in the face and say Iran is not a threat to the United States of America or our soldiers, even though their loved one died at the hands of the Iranian regime.
Okay, all I ask is that you allow me to answer that question since you've asked it now. Is that cool?
It's a yes or no, but go.
No, it's not a yes or no. I'll give you the answer.
Sure it is.
My answer to all of those families would be if
Ben Ferguson walked into this debate to defend Donald Trump's Iran policy. Dave Smith walked in with the actual quotes, the actual timeline, the actual contradictions. And by the end, Ben Ferguson could not explain why the war Trump declared was over last summer is somehow still happening right now. You have felt this before. That specific frustration of watching someone on television defend a policy by just saying the same thing louder. No new evidence. No acknowledgement that the last version of the argument already failed. Just volume. Just confidence. Just the assumption that if you repeat the talking point forcefully enough, nobody will notice that the facts stopped supporting it months ago. Dave Smith noticed, out loud, on camera, in front of Piers Morgan. And what unfolded was not just a debate win. It was a live autopsy of how war propaganda actually works, the moving goalposts, the contradictions that live side by side, the emotional appeals designed to shut down the people asking the right questions. This one is going to make you think, and it is going to make you angry. And both of those things are exactly what should happen when someone finally refuses to let the narrative run unchallenged. By M. Silas Miller. This is Miller's mandate. If you have ever watched a war get sold and resold with a different justification every time, this one is for you. Hit subscribe and let's get into it.
Let's let each other speak. Let's have a proper debate about what is actually a really interesting debate, I think. And it all stemmed from something that Dave Smith on this show said about the United States being, well, let's listen to it.
the IDF is the worst terrorist organization in the region. Let's get real. The United States of America is arguably the worst terrorist organization in the world. If you want to look over the last 25 years, how many innocent civilians we've slaughtered. You're getting us into the neocon. Yeah, that's right. You're getting us into the neocon seventh war, which they've been dying for the last 25 years.
Now, as a consequence of that, all hell broke loose, obviously, online. And Ben Shapiro said about Dave, I'm sorry, but you hate the country. If you say America is the worst terrorist organization in the world, you just do. And Dave has since responded to that on this show. But Ben, let's just get you to, because Dave's already explained what he meant about this.
Yeah.
And many people agree with it, right? And, you know, just to prep you up for this, you're about to defend the charge that America is not the world's worst terrorist organization within hours of Donald Trump posting to the world that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. But in the context of the words coming from the President of the United States, quite hard to argue that that is in itself, those words are not the words you would normally associate with the leader of a terrorist organization.
Yeah, look, I think two things about what the president said there. He's clearly talking to the leadership in Iran, and he's saying that you are going to destroy your people by not opening the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not screwing around. This goes back to FAFO. The president of the United States of America is using the same foreign policy that Hillary Clinton used, that Bill Clinton used, that Jimmy Carter used, and that Barack Obama
When did any of them threaten, Ben? When did any of them threaten?
Let me finish the point I'm going to make there real quick, because it's important. Right. This president, the only difference between his foreign policy with Iran and the other Democrats I mentioned was they all said that they couldn't get a nuclear weapon. And Donald Trump said, I am actually agreeing with you and I'm going to do it. I'm going to stop them. And you cannot be a terrorist to the world while Donald Trump is the president of the United States of America, shut down shipping lanes you have no right to shut down, and expect that there be no consequences. The president doesn't bluff. And so when he puts that out, I think he's had about enough of this. I think he's had about enough of the fact that Iran, even after we go and kill their first level, their second level, their third level, and their fourth level of people, they're still not giving in. He's like, okay, you guys want to play this game, FAFO, and I'm going to act, which is exactly, by the way, why I voted for him.
But just before I go back to Dave to respond to that, explain to me the difference between the belief that Donald Trump has about Iran, that they want death to America, death to all Americans. That's why they want a nuclear weapon. And if they get one, they will kill millions of Americans, which is why America has to stop them. And the president of the United States saying he wants to wipe out an entire civilization in one night, which can only be done with nuclear weapons or weapons of that power.
Well,
so look, as I say, look, I don't think he's going to do that. But he has said he's going to do that. Many people think he's already committed a war crime in signaling his intention to do that. But that's for another day. But my point is, what is the difference in terms of language between the head of Al-Qaeda, say bin Laden, saying wanting to wipe out millions of Americans, or Iran wanting to do that, and America wanting to do that? I mean, that would be Dave's point, I'm sure, in a moment. But before we go to him, what is the difference?
Well, look, I think the president here is a guy that always pushes the limit on what he's saying, especially when he's dealing with bad guys, whether it was in Venezuela, whether it's narco terrorists, or whether it's the Ayatollah and those that are in charge right now in Iran. Do I think he's going to indiscriminately kill a bunch of people? Of course not. Do I think that's the intent of the tweet? Of course not. If you've talked to the president and you know what he says here, you can either just try to hit him on that and score political points, or you can look at what the president has done so far. He has been incredibly surgical with the strikes that he's had. He's not been going after and just bombing. I'll go to an example that I think Dave used on this show, saying Israel is just bombing all these buildings in Gaza, for example. That's not what the president's done here at all. The president has been very surgical in using our military. I have no doubt that that's what he's going to do here. And what he's saying is, if I go after your electrical grid, you literally are going back to the Stone Ages when there was no electricity. So if you want to hit the president political points to win a political argument, fine, do that. But what the president's saying in that tweet, I think, is directly to the leadership in Iran and telling them, I'm not screwing around. This is going to be very bad for you. Open up the Strait of Hormuz and do it immediately. We can have a ceasefire. You guys have been talking to us for a while now. You know how to do stall and delay tactics. This is a deadline. This is a red line. By the way, other presidents have given red lines before. They just don't back them up. This president does. Barack Obama didn't back up his red line multiple times on foreign policy issues, including when chemical weapons were used.
Well, that is true. Yeah, that is true. But Dave Smith, let me come to you. I mean, my big problem with this is, like I say, this will be airing after that deadline has passed. And my guess is the Iranians will not concede in the way that Trump wants them to before this deadline. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they will, but I don't think they will. And therefore, the call is bluff to a degree, and Trump will not then go through with what he vowed to do, which is wipe out the entire Iranian population. And then he becomes, the emperor with no clothes to a degree, the boy who cried wolf. It's like there's a danger in that as well, in the president of the world's greatest military not doing what he says he would do if X, Y, Z doesn't happen.
Well, okay, so let me say, first of all, there's just this obvious contradiction in what Ben just said there, which is that on one hand, he's saying the president doesn't bluff He draws a red line and he sticks to it. And then on the other hand saying, that's just Donald Trump. He talks crazy like this. And you're just trying to win a cheap political argument if you look at what he's literally saying. It can't be both of those things now, can it? If he doesn't bluff, then Donald Trump has promised to send them back to the Stone Age, that it will be the end of the civilization, never to be recovered, and that presumably starting tonight hits their bridge and power plant days. Okay, yes. So if he doesn't, right. So remember the non-interrupting rule. So if he's either bluffing or he's not bluffing here. Now, obviously, it does bode well for this particular political argument that sparked off on your show a few weeks ago, that now Donald Trump is making these threats. But the position Ben's in here, it's almost like being the White House press secretary. If we were talking last week and I had said, Donald Trump's going to say this, you would have been like, no, he's not. No one's saying that. This is ridiculous. But now he's said it. So now you have to defend how he doesn't bluff, but also he doesn't really mean what he said. Look, Piers, I don't know. I hope you're right. But all the indications here are that tonight's 8 p.m. deadline is going to come and go without the Iranians capitulating. And so Donald Trump has really put all his chips in on the center of the table here. So to the dynamic you just laid out, he's now painted himself into this corner for absolutely no reason. He's painted himself into this corner where he's either got to do something huge or, as you said, be exposed.
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That is my first definition of victory. If we have Iran that has been pushed back to the Stone Ages and they're nowhere close to enriching their uranium at 60+%, and that we know that we are safe from a nuclear Iran and a dirty bomb, they've clearly said over and over again, death to America. We know that's their intent. They've been saying it for 40+ years. That is my definition of victory. A bonus on top of that, a tier 2 victory, which I think the media has already made this the new standard, which I disagree with fundamentally, is that there is regime change. The president's made it clear he would love for there to be regime change. And by the way, there has been. We've killed their top 4 guys. So that's 4x regime change, in my opinion. If 4 people that were in charge are no longer in charge, that's pretty good. Would I love for the people in Iran to be able to take over and have genuine freedom? Yes. Is that what I consider a victory? No. That is a bonus. All I care about is that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon and they're not killing more men and women in uniform. They've killed more men and women in uniform from America than any other country in my lifetime. I want that threat off the table. That's my definition of victory, no doubt about it.
Dave Smith, your response.
Well, I mean, again, just as is almost always the case with war propaganda, it's just the contradictions are just everywhere around you. It's like my secondary. I was about to. My secondary goal is regime change, but there's already been regime change in this war, but it's not a war. But we've always been at war for 47 years.
Always said it's a war.
I mean, Piers. Okay, buddy. Yeah. Okay. Well, you say it's a war. The administration won't admit that because it's totally illegal if it is. Even Donald Trump himself said we can't call it a war for legal reasons. But yes, of course, it is a war. But I mean, Piers, if you just think about how many people, and I got to say, particularly, I'm stunned by the Iranian expat types, which I've debated a couple on your show before, because I always am a little bit more forgiving to them when they say something like, you know, it's just how brutally repressive the mullah and the ayatollah's regime is and how they want to liberate the people. But not one of them have jumped off board since Donald Trump has essentially announced total war against the civilian population. And here again, Ben repeats, send them back to the Stone Age. I'm sorry, did women have liberation in the Stone Age? Is that when everyone gets to take their burqas off?
I said that earlier. But Dave, I don't mind the debate, but I said it earlier.
Does that lead
that
to?
Means not
right, I know, but and that leads
electricity.
Right.
That has nothing to do with women's
yes, I
rights.
understand.
Yeah, but Ben, sorry, hang on.
I'm sorry. We said we're not going to interrupt.
Let me just say on that point, Ben.
Well, that's war against the civilian population.
Well, Dave, what Ben is doing is what I've noticed a lot of people on the right have been doing, who are still very pro-Trump in this war, is you're translating what Trump apparently meant when he said we're going to bomb you back to the Stone Ages. You have decided it means no electricity because it's the only way you can really justify it, right?
Piers,
and
which
so
I've been talking Donald Trump
and I would say, Ben, I would say this: when you said victory, that's why it's interesting to get you to clarify what victory is. When you said it, you know, it's stopping the Iranians from developing a nuclear weapon, a dirty bomb. But that's what we were told had been achieved last summer. At the end of the 12-day war, Trump literally said that. We have stopped them developing a nuclear weapon. Mission accomplished. Here we are, less than a year later, 9 months later, and we're being told that victory will be if the United States and Israel stop the Iranians developing a nuclear weapon. But what's happened in 9 months?
Piers, great question. You have 60% enriched uranium that we know about that they still have. That's part of what we want to get out of the country. That is just taking data and looking at it and then saying, is this still a threat? How quickly can you get 60% to where it's military grade, to where you can get a dirty bomb? It's really damn close. So the president made another calculus here and said, okay, we hit those 2 facilities. They didn't stop what they were doing. They still have it way too close to military grade where they can do a dirty bomb. We know their intent is to kill innocent people and get a dirty bomb. They've said it over and over again. So therefore, because of that information, we are going to go in yet again, and we're going to make sure that America is safe and the rest of the world is safe.
All right, so Ben, do you accept that if the Americans and Israelis do not get the enriched uranium out of Iran, this is not victory, it is a failure, the war will have been lost?
I think there's 2 ways you can look at that. And again, this is coming from a military mindset. Number one, as I talk to people in the military, they say, look, if they can't access it, right? If we bomb it in and we push it in and they can't access it anymore, that could be considered a victory from a military standpoint perspective. And again, this is way above my pay grade. That's why I ask other people questions that are experts. Would we love to get it out? Yes. But if we can't get it out and they can't get it out, that can be a victory. It depends on where it is. It depends on how much we bombed it. It depends on how secure it is if it stays in the ground there. So I don't say it's only one or the other, success or failure. It depends on the information on the ground. And if it is in a place where they're like, no one's going to be able to get to this, we can't get to it, neither can they, it's now unusable, that's a success as well. But I'd love to get it out of there. Yes, I don't like Iranians having anything close to it or having it in their backyard.
The problem is,
if you put it in the ground, it's done, it's done.
Let me come back to Dave. I mean, the problem is I've got increasingly limited confidence in the statements about the state of Iran's uranium and ability to build a bomb because of what happened last summer. I believed what I was told, that after the 12-day war, that was it. The threat had been neutralized. They couldn't build a nuclear weapon. That was it. And here we are in March. This was last summer. And in March, now we're being told they've got all this enriched uranium. None of it got removed last time. It's still there. And how are we going to know whether we've removed it from their ability to use it or not? We're not going to know. So, unfortunately, that to me doesn't look like a very substantive victory claim to me. It's just going to muddy the waters again.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and look, the fact that the goalposts just get moved so much, and like you said, Piers, not that long ago, just last summer, where all the people who supported the 12-day war were boasting and demonizing anybody who opposed it as what a success this was because we obliterated their nuclear program. But like, if we have to go back and fight a whole new war right now over that nuclear threat, then that was wrong. Then you got to admit you were wrong about it back then.
From Trump.
And if but
here is the quote from Trump, Dave. This is last year, after the 12-day war. I don't think they'll ever do it again. They've had it. It was a complete obliteration. They were set back decades. Turned out decades was actually 9 months.
Your foreign policy is fraud, Dave. Your foreign policy is bury your head in the sand, bother no one, and then no one bothers you. And when you're dealing with terrorists, that never works. 9/11 is a great example of that, by the way. We were literally burying our head in the sand, acting like Osama bin Laden was not a threat after he kept saying he wanted to take out America. He wanted to go after America. And every president did the same thing. They buried their hand in the sand, and they said, we're not going to deal with him right now. We'll leave him alone.
Okay,
we won't get wars in the Middle East.
Let me ask you this,
so
Ben.
ridiculous and ahistorical.
Ben, what's interesting?
America was just not intervening. No, it's not actually. We were not interventionist until 9/11. Yeah, right, please. We were bombing Iraq. We had a sanctions regime around Iraq. We had military bases in Saudi Arabia. And by the way, every one of the things that the terrorists subjected to
what were we doing in
interventions.
The Middle East? Nothing.
No.
We were doing nothing when 9/11 happened in the Middle East.
The UN,
we were not.
You don't know what you're talking about. The UN
were we invading a country in Iran on 9/11? No.
Can I finish the sentence,
or are
you just going to interrupt?
During 9/11?
Okay.
The answer is no. We were asleep at the wheel on 9/11. There's a reason why John Ashcroft wrote a book called Never Again, because we were so asleep at the wheel that we realized afterwards we can never allow it to happen again.
When Madeleine Albright was asked about how the UN had estimated that 500,000 children had died of starvation and malnutrition due to the Clinton blockade around Iraq, she said, and I quote, "That price is worth it." These were the non-interventionist years of peace and prosperity.
What? 92, 93, 94? We're talking about 2001. That's a long ways off, bro. I said, what were we doing when 9/11 happened in the Middle East? In the Middle East on 9/11.
Try 1998.
Almost 2 decades earlier.
No, I'm talking about 3 years earlier. You don't know what you're talking about.
And you said that Madeleine Albright said that in the early 90s. You just said 90s on the show.
I didn't
2001
say, I said in the
is
90s.
when 9/11 happened. Am I wrong?
1998 is when she made the comment. It was all through the Clinton years. Bill Clinton stopped being president in the year 2000, 1 year before 9/11. Sorry, this is just math,
So you're saying
Ben.
that the blockade of food is what caused 9/11 now?
No, I'm not saying it. Osama bin Laden himself listed it as one of his stated grievances, along with the military bases.
One of a list that was like the Unabombers list.
Yes, that also involved the U.S. military bases on Holy Land in Saudi Arabia and U.S. support for brutal regimes that oppress Muslims in the region and U.S. support for the Israelis who have been occupying, at that time, for 30 plus years, the Palestinian territory. Yes, this is basic history. You can say I'm a fraud, but you don't know any of this.
Hold on.
You don't know any of this.
So I'm correct in saying that your foreign policy is bury your head in the sand and hope that no one bothers you based on what you just said. Because you're saying anytime we stand up for us in the world, that immediately it's going to be our fault when we get attacked. That is your foreign policy.
Instead of you saying it, why don't I just say what I actually believe? What I believe is that we don't launch wars of aggression, wars of choice, reckless wars against countries that don't pose a threat to us. I'm defending the just war theory of Christianity and the constitutional system that the framers laid out. If we do have to go to war, there should be a vote in Congress.
Okay, so then here's my question. To every American that's watching that has lost a loved one at the hands of Iran, you're now telling them when they go to their graves on Memorial Day that Iran was not a threat to the United States of America, as you just described it, and who gives a crap that those American soldiers were killed at the hands of Iran and the terrorist regimes that they aid, sponsor, support, and give free passage to?
Here's a good rule of thumb here, Ben. If I didn't say it and then you just say you're saying it, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we're going to get. No, I literally didn't say any of that. Yes, that's right. That part I said. Correct.
So
Iran
to the American families,
to the United States of America.
To the American families who've lost loved ones in a uniform who were killed at the hands of the Iranians and their terrorist proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS and others they gave safe passage to. You're telling me that Iran was not involved in the murder of those American soldiers. They killed more American soldiers than any other regime in the world.
Ben, I'm sorry. I know I'm a fraud and I don't know a lot about foreign policy. Did you just say that ISIS is an Iranian proxy?
I said that they knew that ISIS was given safe passage to cross through at some points in the past. Yes, that's a fact.
They're a proxy of the Iranians.
I said proxies and including
they get along so well.
I'm going to go back to asking the simple question I asked you a second ago. If you are American and your loved one was killed at the hands of the Iranian regime and their terrorist proxies, you're telling me, and you want to look at those families in the face and say Iran is not a threat to the United States of America or our soldiers, even though their loved one died at the hands of the Iranian regime.
Okay, all I ask is that you allow me to answer that question since you've asked it now. Is that cool?
It's a yes or no, but go.
No, it's not a yes or no. I'll give you the answer.
Sure it is.
My answer to all of those families would be, if you had listened to people like me, people like Ron Paul, people like Pat Buchanan, our troops never would have been in Lebanon or in Iraq to begin with, and your loved ones would still be with you. But instead, you listen to the foreign policy of people like you, Ben, and that's why we were involved in those conflicts to begin with. Iran poses no threat to the United States of America, meaning the middle part of North America. Does Iran pose a threat to our ability to occupy Iraq? Well, actually, we were kind of on the side of the most Iran-linked militia groups at the time. But yeah, there was some fighting with some Shiites in there, too. It was another disastrous war that Piers Morgan was correct to oppose. And none of those boys would have been killed if they had listened to people like Piers.
Let me start with the single most important moment in this entire debate. Because it got said quickly, and the conversation moved past it before it fully landed. Last summer, after the 12-day war, Donald Trump stood up and said the following: I do not think they will ever do it again. They have had it. It was a complete obliteration. They were set back decades. Decades turned out to be 9 months. 9 months later, the same people who called that a victory, who attacked anyone who questioned it as naive or anti-American or soft on terror, were back on television explaining why they now need to fight the same war again over the same nuclear threat they already told you had been eliminated. And Ben Ferguson sat in that studio and defended both positions. Simultaneously, without acknowledging that holding both positions at the same time means at least one of them was a lie. You felt that contradiction before Dave Smith named it. You felt it the moment the news cycle shifted, and the justifications shifted with it. You just needed someone to say it out loud with the receipts in hand. That is what this clip is. Now, let us go deeper. Because the goalposts moment is important, but it is the symptom. The disease is something older, and something the people defending these wars are counting on you not having the patience to trace all the way back to its source. The contradiction at the center of Ben Ferguson's entire argument. Ben Ferguson made 2 claims in this debate that cannot both be true. He said, the president does not bluff. He draws red lines and he backs them up. That was claim 1. He also said, when Trump said he was going to wipe out an entire civilization and send them back to the Stone Ages, he did not really mean that literally. That was just Trump being Trump. Tough talk to send a message. Do not take it at face value. You cannot hold both of those positions. You either have a president who means what he says and follows through, in which case, threatening to destroy an entire civilization is a genuine statement of intent and a potential war crime. Or you have a president who uses extreme language as a negotiating tactic that should not be taken literally, in which case the whole argument about red lines and credibility collapses. You cannot use the credibility argument when it helps you, and the "it is just rhetoric" argument when it does not. But that is exactly what Ben Ferguson did for the entire debate. And Piers Morgan caught it, and Dave Smith caught it. And now you have caught it too. This is not a complicated logical trap. It is a basic contradiction. And the fact that someone can sit on a major television program and make both arguments in the same conversation without being immediately disqualified from the discussion tells you something important about how our media environment processes the defense of military action. It does not require consistency. It requires volume and confidence, and the ability to pivot fast enough that the contradiction gets buried under the next emotional appeal before the audience has time to hold both statements up against each other. The 9/11 history lesson. Because Dave Smith was right, and Ben Ferguson did not know enough to refute it. Ben Ferguson invoked 9/11 as proof that non-intervention does not work, that America was minding its business, that we were asleep at the wheel, that the lesson of 9/11 is that you have to confront threats aggressively, or they come to you. This is one of the most repeated and least examined claims in American foreign policy discourse. And it is wrong. Not as an opinion, as a historical fact. When Madeleine Albright was asked about the 500,000 children who died as a result of the Clinton-era sanctions and blockade of Iraq, she said the price was worth it. This was not a fringe statement. It was the Secretary of State of the United States openly acknowledging that American policy had contributed to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of children, and describing it as an acceptable cost. Osama bin Laden himself, in his own stated justifications, listed the sanctions on Iraq, the American military presence on Saudi soil, and American support for regimes that oppressed Muslim populations as the reasons for the attack. You do not have to agree with his conclusions to acknowledge that the historical record shows a direct line between American foreign policy decisions and the conditions that produced 9/11. None of this means America deserved to be attacked. That is not the argument. The argument, Dave Smith's argument, is that the foreign policy of endless intervention does not make America safer. It creates the conditions for the next attack. And then the next attack gets used to justify the next intervention. And the cycle continues. And the people who profit from that cycle, the defense contractors, the foreign policy establishment, the politicians whose careers depend on the narrative of permanent threat, those people never have to reckon with the cost, because the cost is paid by someone else entirely. By the families Ben Ferguson invoked, by the soldiers who came home broken, by the civilians in the countries where the bombs landed. That is what Dave Smith was saying when Ben Ferguson accused him of burying his head in the sand. And Ben Ferguson's response was to accuse him of not caring about Gold Star families, which is the move, which is always the move. When the argument runs out, reach for the grieving family. Make the person asking the right question look like they are disrespecting the sacrifice of the people who paid the highest price. It is emotionally devastating and intellectually bankrupt at the same time. And it works because the emotional devastation arrives faster than the intellectual bankruptcy. Piers Morgan did not let it work this time. Dave Smith did not let it work this time. The moving goalposts on nuclear weapons, because this one deserves its own moment. After the 12-day war, victory was declared. The nuclear threat had been neutralized. Iran had been set back decades. That was the argument. That was the justification. That was what supporters of the war pointed to when anyone questioned whether the whole thing had been worth it. 9 months later, 60% enriched uranium. Still in the ground. Still potentially accessible. Still a threat. And now a whole new war is being waged over the same threat that was supposed to have been eliminated by the last war. Ben Ferguson's response to this was to say that uranium in the ground that nobody can access might still count as a victory depending on the circumstances. That is not a foreign policy argument. That is a man inventing a definition of success in real time because the previous definition no longer applies. And the reason he can do that, the reason he can redefine victory mid-conversation without being immediately laughed off the set, is because the people watching at home have been conditioned to accept that the standards of success in these conflicts are always just slightly beyond what has currently been achieved. Always one more strike away. Always one more operation from the decisive moment that will finally justify everything that came before it. You are tired of that. I know you are. Because the bill for that permanent, almost victory is not paid by the people defining what victory means. It is paid in fuel prices, in inflation, in the sons and daughters who come back from places most Americans cannot find on a map, in the moral cost of a country that has been at war for so long that war has stopped feeling like an emergency and started feeling like weather. The ISIS moment, because it needs to be addressed directly. Ben Ferguson claimed that ISIS was given safe passage by Iran. Dave Smith asked, directly on camera, "Did you just say ISIS is an Iranian proxy?" Because ISIS and Iran are not allies. They are ideological enemies. ISIS is a Sunni extremist organization. Iran is a Shia state. The idea that Iran was facilitating ISIS is not just wrong. It is the opposite of the documented relationship between those two entities. Iran has actively fought against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. The suggestion that they provided safe passage is not a serious foreign policy claim. It is the kind of thing that sounds ominous if you do not know the history and collapses immediately if you do. And the reason it matters is not just because it is factually wrong, it is because it reveals the mechanism. When the specific argument runs out, add another name to the threat list. Connect enough scary-sounding organizations together loosely enough that the audience cannot hold the contradictions in their head at the same time. Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. String them together fast enough, and the audience stops asking which of these connections are documented and which are invented, and just feels the general weight of threat. That weight is the product, not the specific claim. The weight. Dave Smith did not accept the weight. He asked for the specific claim. And Ben Ferguson did not have one. Here is what I want you to take from this clip beyond the debate itself. Beyond the specific arguments about Iran and nuclear weapons and 9/11 and goalposts. The people defending these wars are not stupid. Ben Ferguson is not a stupid man. He is a man who has built a career on being fluent in a specific language, the language of American military intervention, that has its own internal logic, its own emotional appeals, its own rules about what questions are allowed and which ones mark you as naive or dangerous or insufficiently patriotic. Dave Smith speaks a different language, the language of historical consequence, of blowback, of who actually pays the price when the foreign policy establishment gets what it wants. And the reason that language sounds radical to some audiences is not because it is wrong. It is because the institutions that shape how we think about foreign policy have spent decades making the other language feel like common sense, and this language feel like fringe thinking. You are not obligated to accept that framing. You never were. And the fact that you are here, watching this clip, sitting with these questions, refusing to let the goalpost move one more time without naming it, that matters. It is not nothing. It is the beginning of the thing that changes how these conversations go. We do not have to keep accepting a world where a war gets declared over and then restarted 9 months later with a new justification, and nobody in the studio is allowed to point out that the previous justification turned out to be wrong. We can just say it, out loud, with the receipts. That is the mandate. If this one made you think, really think, not just feel, share it. Put it in front of someone who is still operating inside the old language. Subscribe to Miller's mandate if you want more analysis that refuses to let the narrative run unchallenged. And drop in the comments what you think the actual goal of this war is. Because I want to hear it, and I think you already know the answer. I am Silas Miller. You are not watching this alone. The mandate does not stop here.